The questions for interview can be structured or open-ended or semi-structured. So students in general are interested in knowing different forms of expert interview and how to select a particular form for his or her research area.
See, a very simple answer to this otherwise a fairly complex question is, it all depends on the focus of the research program. Suppose a researcher is interested in, let's say, easily identifiable quantitative processes, right? And that is the be all and the end all of that particular researcher. Then clearly what you need is very carefully designed schedules which are complete in what they set out for the researcher, right? Now, typically, large-scale surveys, let's say relating to, for instance, agricultural changes, population dynamics, and so on. Where what is being sought by the researcher through these schedules which are complete, there is almost no openness of any kind, right? Asking questions which can be easily responded to, and for that one needs targets and answers which can be easily quantified. So that's one kind of research, okay? As I said, typically large-scale surveys are of this kind, but we can think of surveys which are more focused, smaller, etc., which again are in the same spirit. Looking at, let's say, village studies in different parts of the world, 8 villages, 10 villages, etc., which are fashioned and inspired by similar kinds of spirit, similar kinds of inquiry that I mentioned earlier, which characterize large-scale surveys. That is, to get a very good, very detailed, quantitative understanding of the sort of the dynamic that we are interested in. The other extreme could well be thinking of issues which cannot be easily or with great difficulty as well, not quantifiable. What do you do with those issues? Right? Think of, let's say, intra-household gender dynamics, which plays a very important role in agrarian dynamics. The imbalances which we have in terms of power relations, which impacts on almost every outcome which is connected with what happens in that household. A very famous statement by Susan George, in the book How the Other Half Dies. She asks, can we think of someone poorer than the poorest man? A rhetorical question. And she answers, yes, indeed, his wife. Captures the essence of something which is so easy to see, but gets so easily ignored in a lot of the research which is trying to understand the dynamics of change, the dynamics of well-being, etc. Right? So think in terms of two extremes. One is answers and issues which can be easily quantified. Right? Other extreme, such easy quantifications are extremely difficult. Some of it through a very careful scheduling of the questionnaire, of what the researcher sets out as some kind of frame, is feasible. It's not the case that it's entirely impossible. Right? But there is a great deal which can never be put in black and white in terms of trying to find easy answers and easy responses, etc.
Once we opt for a structured or semi-structured interview, a student might be interested in knowing the structure and sequence of the question in expert interview. Please throw some light on that.
Yes, indeed. You know, as I said earlier, one has to keep that basic principle of thinking of the whole, the broad kind of field of inquiry, and then breaking that into small segments, parts, etc., with the end objective of putting together the parts into the whole. Now, fundamentally, what this means then is to start with the general and keep getting into particular and so on. Right? You know, the extreme example of it would be, let's say, the perfect world fables of George Louis Borges, one of the greatest literary figures of the 20th century, where, for instance, you are asking what was critical for the emperor in a particular war, right? And the example that in this perfect world fable that Borges has is to think of a cartographer. Now, for lack of time, I'll not get into details, but you know, very simple half a minute kind of conversation on this. The emperor asks the cartographer to draw a map of the empire. The cartographer uses the standard scale, whatever 1:1000 or whatever, and then comes with a map. Emperor looks at that particular map, is furious, says, what about that particular bridge? What particular that temple? What particular that monument? Where I and my army took shelter, or I used to cross a particular river. How is it that this particular bridge is missing from this map? How is that particular monument or temple missing from this map? Because in the absence of that, there would be no me, no empire, right? Cartographer obviously has to enlarge the scale. The map becomes bigger. And in Borges' world, perfect world fables, ultimately the empire and the map become one and the same, right? So one has to keep asking what are the central questions, and with respect to those central questions, what is the in-depth kind of engagement that serves the satisfactory purpose for the researcher. So the general to the particular, right? That has to be the sequencing.